Hello and welcome to Storytime Classics, brought to you by Southwest Shakespeare Company, a founding resident company of Mesa Arts Center in beautiful Mesa, Arizona. I am Beau Heckman, and today it is my extreme pleasure to be bringing you the star of our current show, All the Devils Are Here, How Shakespeare Invented the Villain, and our advisory board member, Patrick Page. Hi, Patrick.
Hi,
Welcome.
how are you? Thank you. Nice to be here.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us today.
My pleasure.
With the meteoric success of Hadestown and Spider-Man on Broadway and Casa Valentia, to name a few, there's a lot we know about you already and much to find out. Thank you for allowing us inside a look at your life and times.
Thank you. My pleasure.
First of all, we'd like to thank you for taking so much time with this company. Your master classes last night and the night before were game changers for so many of our artists. At a time where you are in so demand due to the hiatus of Hadestown, we are grateful for your generosity. There are a lot of happy people at Southwest Shakespeare Company right now.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, it's great to be in Arizona and feel the nice, warm, dry air. And be in big open spaces where you can take off your mask every once in a while, which you can't do in New York.
I would imagine not. To all of our great good fortune, I believe you grew up in Ashland, Oregon. Is that right?
I didn't grow up there. I spent some summers there with my dad. My dad was an actor there in the early mid-'60s. And so when I was a little boy, I would go with him during the summertime.
What kind of impact on did the Oregon Shakespeare Festival have on you?
Well, I guess it was formative for me. I mean, along with the fact, of course, that it was my dad up on the stage, and I really worshipped my dad. So the fact that he was up there doing this thing, and it was a strange reversal of the normal way of things, because in Ashland, I was a little boy. I was 3, 4, 5 years old, and I would be the one who was sitting and having to be calm and adult-like while the adults were up running around and laughing and skipping and dancing and playing and fighting on the stage. So from my earliest times, I thought, well, there's the fun place to be, is up there.
I can understand that. What kind? I've been told you were a great speech and debate person in high school, recruited into college. You're not alone in that. I believe we both know Brian Vaughn at Utah Shakespeare Festival is also into speech and debate. I know I attended a couple of tournaments with him at the same. It was fun to see him doing that. We both went to high school together. I know because, what kind of impact did that have on your career, the speech and debate?
What a great question. I haven't gotten that question a lot, but it had a huge impact in a couple of ways. One, simply the fact that you would, and let's say you were in a category like dramatic interpretation, where you'd essentially be doing a 10-minute scene by yourself, and you might play several characters in it. I remember in one of them I played 2 characters, and another one. And then there was also dual interpretation, where you'd have a partner. So you actually have an acting partner. And in college, I had this wonderful partner named Kevin Loomer, who was and is a brilliant actor. And so, and you got to do it over and over and over again, because you'd go, there'd be, let's say, 4 preliminary rounds and then a semifinals and a final. So in a single day, you might do it 6 times.
Right.
Plus the times that you'd practice it, and you'd be doing it for a live audience. So, repetition is the mother of skill. And because I was just able to do these things over and over and over again, I think it was very useful for me. I also think that the self-generated part of it, the fact that one was responsible for finding one's own material, for editing it, for making the cutting, taking a play of a couple hours and trying to make something sensible that lasted for 10 minutes as a little piece of art or a little piece of theater. I think I think that had a big impact on me because I've always felt, and this is the case, of course, with the show I'm doing for you here now,
Mhm.
that one could generate one's own work. You could take an author or a number of authors, and you could create a piece and you could perform it.
So you ended up at Whitman College, and I guess it's famous for Adam West of Batman fame and Dirk Benedict. If anyone remembers Battlestar Galactica, the original Battlestar Galactica, he was also on the original A Team, if I
He,
remember correctly.
he was.
What and so now you as well. What happened? What happened to you there?
Well, I went to Whitman mainly to study other things. I didn't go there mainly to study theater, but when I got there, which isn't entirely the case because I did audition for Jack Fryman, who was the head of the theater department, in order to get part of my scholarship in order to go there. So I had a scholarship that was funded by a number of departments, but and theater was one of them. But the main thing was that there was just this remarkable, brilliant, eccentric man named Jack Fryman who couldn't see any limitations as to what could be done in a college theater. So, for example, just after Nicholas Nickleby performed on Broadway, he saw it on Broadway because he was from New York, and every year he would go back to New York in the summertime and see all the shows. And he would come back and say, well, we're doing this play. And somehow he would get the rights to them because we were in Walla Walla, Washington, and nobody was going to see it. And he would say, we're going to do 8.5 hours of Nicholas Nickleby. That's what we're going to do. But we're not just going to do that. We're going to do 14 other plays in the season as well. And so we would do 14 plays per season. So if you wanted to be in a play, there was a play for you to be in. If you wanted to direct a play, there was a play for you to direct. If you wanted to design a play, there was a play for you to design. And so it was just a remark. And he was an incredible set designer. He had ideas, scenic ideas, that I frankly have never seen before or since. I'm still waiting for one of these designs. We did this amazing 19th century melodrama called The Silver King. And he did a scenic design for this, which was one of the most brilliant things I've ever seen in my life. And I've been waiting to see it appear anywhere else. This particular kind of scenic design, which would be very hard to describe in this kind of, I'd have to show you what it did. But it was like a magic trick every time the scenery changed. And it changed because it was a 19th century melodrama. It changed about every 7 or 8 minutes. And he didn't think there was anything we couldn't do. So in my senior year, or rather in my junior year, he said, you're going to play King Lear next year. And I played King Lear when I was 22 years old.
Oh my goodness. That must have been daunting. How did you feel about that? Did that intimidate you any?
Well, when you're 22, you're too stupid to be intimidated. Or at least I was. I know Orson Welles said the same thing about Citizen Kane when he was, not to compare myself in any way with Orson Welles, but when asked about how he made Citizen Kane, he said, look, I was 24. I didn't know the things you couldn't do. I didn't know that if you put someone at the other end of a long hallway and you wanted the candle in the foreground to also be in focus, I didn't know you couldn't do that. So I just said to my cinematographer, this is what I want. I want that in focus, and I want that in focus. And he figured out a way, so, and he had, because he didn't want the job, he had final cut in his contract. He was the only director other than Charlie Chaplin to ever get final cut at the height of the studio system. It was just unthinkable that the studio would give away that kind of power. But because he had final cut, he could make the movie he wanted. Now, after that, of course, he was never allowed to make a movie again because they were still never a movie of that kind. He tried to make The Magnificent Ambersons in the same way, and he had final cut on Magnificent Ambersons, but the studio decided they were going to wrest it away from him. So they sent him on supposedly a war effort to South America to go down and shoot Mardi Gras. And while he was there, they changed the ending of the film and reshot everything. And he was never allowed to make a movie again. It was the price of his genius.
Now, I have a question personally. We both walked the boards of the Great American Melodrama and
Ah,
vaudeville, and I wanted to ask you about your experiences. I have very very fond memories of the shows I've done there, and it's a very very special place in my heart. I wanted to get your take on it.
oh, well, it was so wonderful. It was my first job out of college. I hadn't yet taken my equity card. And so when you graduate from college, there were all the different theaters, dinner theaters, melodrama theaters, summer stock theaters that would come all in one group. I forget what it was called, but you would audition for all of them. And they came around and said they'd like me to be part of the company. I think it was about the only company that told me that they'd like me to join. And I was to come there to play Dracula in Richard Sharp's adaptation of Dracula, which I had seen in Ashland, and it was a wonderful adaptation. And I thought, well, and it was, I believe, only the second or third production of it. I was thrilled to go, and I got there, and we did Dracula in that fall slot, and then they did a Christmas Carol every year, and we were allowed to audition, and I auditioned, and they wanted me to play Scrooge, so I played Scrooge in that, which was great fun. That was the first time I played Scrooge. I've since played him 1, 2, 3, 4 more times, but that was the first time I played him. And then we did. I directed a production of a 19th century. I was very keen to do a real melodrama since it was called the Melodrama Theater. And when we had done this melodrama, The Silver King, at Whitman, I had studied Delsartean technique because the Delsarte technique was used in 19th century melodramas. People think that it was used as a kind of a semaphore to signal the audience who was way up in the gods, as to what the character was feeling, and it did that. But so, for example, if you were concerned, you might bite your finger like this. If you were in grief, you might put your hand here. If you were shocked, the hands go here, right? And they even had things for dying, where if you die, the palm goes forward, and then the thumb turns in, and that means you're dying, which seems like similar in some ways to kabuki. But in fact, what Delsarte was doing was he had found that, and now we call this neurolinguistic programming, but he had found that certain positions in the body created certain states of being. So that if you put your head in your hand like this and you leave it there, eventually your body will take on the feeling of a person who is in this state. And if you put your hand here like this, eventually the body takes that. So it was actually a pretty sophisticated way of acting, but it then became a kind of a semaphore to signal to the audience, who was very far away in these huge theaters, that, I'm feeling grief, I'm feeling worried, I'm feeling shocked, So I wanted to do a production where we tried this out, and we found a 19th century melodrama, which was called The Mainline. But at the time, mainlining, what do you mainline? Heroin or cocaine or crack? Anyway, whatever you mainline, it was very much in the news. So they wanted me to change the title. So I made a cutting of the script, and we changed the title and called it Romance on the Rails, which was a much more palatable thing if you were going to go to the beach that day. And I got to direct this thing and really try out this technique. And the effort that I wanted with it was the same thing that we had tried with The Silver King, in which I played the title character at Whitman, which was, how quickly can you turn the audience from genuine feeling to laughter? Because, of course, we see these things as funny nowadays, and yet in the play, really serious things are happening. A little crippled girl is dying, or all of those kind of Dickensian tropes. So And it was wonderful because you put the music under it, and you do the gesture, and the audience would laugh, and then a bit later you'd hear them sniffling, and you realize that you could do both at once. And so I had a great time with that. And then we did the Pirates of Penzance, in which I played the Major General. So I had the most wonderful time. And because we as you know, you made very little money. I think it was about $100 a week when I went there in 1985. And so we really needed money to live. A lot of us lived in one house that was just across the railroad tracks from the theater.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the rent was something like $200 or something, and each of us paid like $50. But that $50 was, a lot of money when you consider you're making $100 a week. And so we came up with that. When were you there? Were you there after 85 or before?
Well, after 85, yes.
Okay, so you may have inherited. You'll tell me if this still existed, but I was very greedy while I was there. I still am, and so I came up with a thing where all of the actors had to, in addition to acting, we also had to sweep the floors, pick up the garbage,
Yes,
and work behind the bar where we sold hot dogs and popcorn and soda pop and beer, I believe.
Sounds very familiar.
And so we put a bell at the end of the bar and a tip jar.
Mm-hmm.
And whenever someone would give a tip, we would ring the bell. And wherever you were in the theater, if you were an usher, if you were in a dressing room, if you were seating someone at a table, wherever you were, you would yell, "Thank you for the tip." And this, of course, increased the tips exponentially. Mm-hmm. So we went from getting like maybe $100 in tips per show to getting like $400 or $500 in tips per show. So we raised our salary. We about doubled our salary per week by doing this extortion. And and that's what I remember most about it. And then, of course, we had these big houses that we lived in, and we used to play a game. We used to play murder, where we would turn off all the lights. And then we just had a wonderful time. And I don't ever remember feeling, we were dirt poor, but I don't remember feeling dirt poor.
I always felt wealthy beyond imagine, and it had nothing to do with money.
Yeah, exactly. You got to act for a living.
Yeah. Great times out there. What ultimately lured you to Gotham?
Well, I come from a very small town, Monmouth, Oregon. It has about 3,000 people. It's a rural community. Well, it's kind of split between a rural community and a college town. So anybody who doesn't work for the college is probably working on a farm or in trucking, and the rest of the people work on the college campus. That's a generalization, of course, but just to give you the idea. And I had never lived in a city. And I'd never really been to cities much. So I moved from Monmouth, Oregon to Walla Walla, Washington, from Walla Walla, Washington to Oceano, California, and from Oceano, California to Cedar City, Utah. So I was just going from one tiny place to another. So I had started doing regional theater, and I got a meeting with a director in Seattle named Warner Shook, who ran the Intimom Theater at the time. And I wanted to work at the Intimom, and he said he didn't have anything for me. And then it's a strange story, because to this day, crows are unbelievably important kind of animals in my life, because they show up at remarkable times. And as we were sitting there and he was telling me that he didn't have anything for me, a flock of, I would say, at least 100 crows alighted on the tree outside his window. They're making this cacophonous noise. It was the most extraordinary thing. And I said to him, "Does this happen every day?" He said, "No, this is the first day it's happened." And he said, "You know what? I think I might have something for you." And he went in the other room and he brought me back a script that was about that thick. And he said, I don't have anything for you in this season, but I'm directing a play that's going to Broadway. It's called The Kentucky Cycle. and have a look at this role. And I'm not saying that you have it, but I know I can get you an audition. So I turned to the character, whose name was Patrick. And the first line of the speech that he had was, "When I hear the crows, I know I'm dreaming." And so I went, at the time I was preparing to play Hamlet, and I had rented a little cabin on the Oregon coast in order to sort of shut myself away for a month and learn the role. And I took that script out there and I worked on it along with Hamlet. And then I had to fly myself to New York. They weren't doing me any favors. And I flew to New York and I did the audition. And I was memorized, and the audition went well. And then I waited for about 2, 3, 4 weeks. I don't know how long now. But I got a call from Warner Shook. And he said, "Patrick, I really loved your audition, and I'd like you to join the show." I said, "Great." He said, "No, but wait." He said, I'm not ready to do that yet because I've heard that you may be difficult to work with. And I said, "Okay. I'm not sure where that's coming from," because I was quite naive about how difficult I was to work with. And I said, "Have you asked this person, this director?" He said, "Yes." "Have you asked this director?" "Yes." So then I thought, oh, I know this one director really believes in me, Libby Apple. Now, I have to tell you that I didn't have any directors who refused to work with me. They all kept hiring me, but no one had told me that I was problematic in rehearsal. And so I said, "Did you ask Libby Apple?" Because Libby had directed me in Troilus and Cressida and Othello at the Utah Shakespeare Festival. She then brought me to Ashland and directed me in The Winter's Tale. Then she brought me to Indianapolis to play Hamlet. So I thought, well, if anybody's on my team, it's Libby Apple. He said, "Yeah, I talked to Libby, and she said it could be a problem if you're not playing the lead." And I said, okay, I get it. I said, "Well, I'll tell you this. If you give me this chance, I will not be difficult." And he said, "Okay." And that's how I came to New York. He cast me in that show. But it was this close to not. And it was only because Warner Shook had the kindness to call me and say, "Hey, this has been a problem," that I was able to do it. He didn't just say, "Okay, I'll give that a pass." So I owe a lot to him.
Absolutely. Tell us about your involvement in the Shakespeare Theater Company in Washington, D.C. You've had many critically acclaimed roles in the nation's capital.
That's another little bit of a funny story. How long do we have? I don't want to take up all your time with these.
No, we're good. It's as long as you want to say.
Well,
I don't want to take up your time.
along in that same period of time when I was doing Hamlet for Libby Apple. Well, first of all, the very first time I auditioned for Michael Kahn, who was the artistic director of the Shakespeare Theater in Washington, D.C., was when I auditioned for the Juilliard School when I was 20 years old. And Michael Kahn headed the acting department. And so I had gone to Washington to audition for the Juilliard School. And I got the rejection letter. So I was like, okay, Michael Kahn doesn't, whatever. I don't know what conclusion I came to at the time. I can't remember. I probably thought he didn't like me, or I'm not sure what conclusion I came to. I was 20 years old. Anyway, I didn't go to Juilliard. And then years later, I was doing Hamlet in Indianapolis, and it was very well received. And I got some kind of, I can't remember what it was, because it certainly wasn't an email in 1993, but somehow I got a message from the Shakespeare Theater in Washington, D.C., saying they were casting their productions of Richard II and Romeo and Juliet, and they'd heard nice things about my Hamlet, and would I come to New York to audition? And I don't remember for sure, but I think they even flew me out. And I flew to New York, and I auditioned, and Michael Kahn was the director of the Richard II, and he was the artistic director of the theater. And I did this audition, And he seemed quite happy with the audition. And he said, can you come back tomorrow? Because for a callback, because the director of Romeo and Juliet's not here until tomorrow. And I said, I can, but I have to change my flight, which I was completely willing to do. And I changed my flight. So I must have booked the flight. I must have done this all on my dime. And I was ready to come back the next day. But I said to Michael before I left, I said, listen, just so you know, I'm supposed to be in Cedar City, Utah in 2 weeks. So if you want to hire me, I will take the job, but I would need to know immediately because I have to call them and give them an opportunity to get another actor, which I knew they could because I had been involved with the casting process in Utah. And so I knew there was a good alternate list, and I wasn't too worried about that. But although I should have been, because Fred Adams took it very poorly when I did pull out. But at any rate, I came back the next day and I did the audition, and the temperature in the room had changed entirely. And what I was doing was not going over very well at all. And at the end of that audition, Michael Kahn said, good luck in Utah. So I knew, Paige and I now use the phrase good luck in Utah as a way of dismissing someone. So once again, I thought, okay, I'm not going to work for Michael Kahn, I guess. Fast forward, I come to New York with the Kentucky cycle. It's now 1995. And the Shakespeare Theater in DC is holding auditions. So I say to my agent at the time, who I'm freelancing with, I say, could you just submit me and get me in for the Shakespeare Theater? I mean, after all, my resume at the time was almost all Shakespeare. And I played, leading parts at major theaters. I played Mark Antony and Autolycus and stuff in Ashland. I played Hamlet in Indianapolis, Richard II in Alabama. I played Richard III, Brutus, Macbeth, etc. in Utah. I played Henry V and Oberon and Pioneers. I worked all over, right? It should look good on paper. Even if I sucked, I should be able to get an audition. And she came back and said, oh, darling, they won't see you. Michael says he knows your work and they don't want to see you. So I thought, okay, that's it. Whatever. They don't like me. Fine. I'll go on. I don't enjoy that, but I'll go on with my life. That's 1995. Fast forward 10 years later, I'm in The Lion King, and I get this call from my agent's office saying, the Shakespeare Theater called and they want to offer you the role of Macbeth. And I said, what? I said, no. Maybe they want me to audition for it. They said, no, we negotiated it. Here's your housing. Here's the money. They want to offer you the part. And we've talked to Lion King. You have the out in your contract. You can go and come back. I said, that's so confusing to me because I thought they hated me. So, all right. So I wanted to call and talk to Michael Kahn and say, what's going on here? And what are you thinking of for the Macbeth? And what's it going to be like? When is it set? Et cetera, et cetera. Well, you can't talk to Michael because he's in Venice and there's no contact. First contact is going to be the morning of the first read-through. So I go to Washington and I say, we have breakfast before the first read-through, which is the first time I've sat down with him. And I said, Michael, what was the deal? I'm thrilled to be doing this, but it's confusing to me because I've auditioned for you these other times, and I thought that I wasn't your guy. And he said, no. He said, we liked you a lot, and in fact, we've offered you many things over the years, but you've never been available. You weren't right for those projects, but that we've made you many offers. We offered you a Benedict. We offered you this. It's about, and so I found out that I'd had these offers and my agent had never told me because I was working. They just said, oh, he's not available right now. Wow. So I'd gone with this myth in my head that I tell this story as a way of saying to actors, especially young actors, but actors at any point in their career, you don't know what they're thinking on the other side of the table. So don't put the narrative in your head of like, oh, they hate me, or oh, I'm not good enough, or whatever. That's likely not what's going on. And then once I did the Macbeth, on opening night of the Macbeth, he asked me to play Iago, and then to play Claudius, and then I since then played Coriolanus and Prospero, and I love that theater very, very much. I love Michael Kahn as the director. I love the aesthetic of that theater, and I really deeply love the Washington audience. Um, First of all, it's a younger audience than one is used to at an institutional theater. There are lots of people in their 30s and 40s, and although that doesn't sound that young, if you're used to working at Roundabout or Lincoln Center or MT Manhattan Theater Club, you look out there and it's it's all white hair like mine, and so they're younger, they're smart, they've seen 4 productions of Hamlet, and they're now wanting to see your Hamlet or your Coriolanus, your Prospero. And yeah, I've just really loved it there. And they've been so generous. And I think the emphasis at the theater is always in the right place, which is on the text, on the plays themselves, and trying to get the play as good as possible, as opposed to trying to which is not to say that the play has to slavishly be set in some kind of Elizabethan, fantasy land, but that it's the attempt is to try to excavate and uncover the play that Shakespeare wrote, at least in my experience.
Enter Paige Davis. Now, starting tomorrow night, you will be performing in one of Frank Lloyd Wright's smallest venues, UNESCO World Heritage Site, Taliesin West. But years ago, you were in this town performing on Frank Lloyd Wright's largest stage at ASU Gamage.
Yeah.
And then is that where you met the charming feather duster? Is it Babette in Beauty and the Beast?
Babette in Beauty and the Beast. When we started that show in 1995. It was the first national tour of the show, so it rehearsed in New York City. Paige lived in LA at the time, but flew to New York City for the auditions. And I had just come out of a terrible, heartbreaking relationship, and she was in a marriage that was also quite fragile at the time. And so I didn't think anything of it, aside from the fact that I thought she was gorgeous and talented. We got on the road, and when you're on a tour, and incidentally, the word tour kind of is, I don't know what you would actually call what we were on nowadays, because when you think of a tour, you think of, 1 or 2 night stands. These were stands where we would do the play for 3 months in Chicago and 6 months in Washington, and then, 2 months in Phoenix and so on. So we would sit down in each city for a while. And when she was in the show at first, she was in the ensemble. And then after the first year, she was promoted to the role of Babette. And I can't remember if she played Babette in Phoenix. I think she did. I think that was right at the beginning of our second year. And incidentally, that's an extraordinary theater for a big show like Lion King. I think I played Lion King there too. I'm not sure. I can't remember. I played it at so many different houses. But because of the unified seating, Frank Lloyd Wright, whether he knew it or not, he understood, well, all of his architecture is based on his understanding of the human being and the psychology of the human being. And the theater is that. So it has unified seating. There are no aisles. The audience is one unit. And that means they become one thing. We don't talk about, an audience as a group. We talk about an audience as if it is an individual. And indeed, an audience becomes an individual if they are allowed to. In fact, they've done studies. There was a study last year in Great Britain where they actually hooked the audience up to heart monitors as they were watching a performance. And what they discovered is that after 20 minutes of the performance, all of the hearts began to beat in unison. And that's what happens. And every actor who's been on stage for any amount of time knows this about audiences, that they coalesce into a being in the first 20 minutes of the play. And so that you're then not talking to a group of people, you are then talking to an individual. And so Frank Lloyd Wright, in that theater, he puts them all together. Now, this is the opposite of, for example, a space like the Masonic Temple in Detroit, which is a terrible theater, which has a little pod of audience here, an aisle, a little pod here, an aisle, a big aisle here, a little pod of audience here, an aisle, a little pod of audience here, an aisle. So basically, what you've got like 6, 8, 10 audiences, and you're trying to unite them. Very, very hard. And so what they do, because people are afraid of, one of the things people are most afraid of is being outside of the group, right? That's one of our deepest terrors. It's atavistic, because if you got separated from the group when you were an early mammal or an early primate, that meant you were going to die, right? So people don't want to laugh when nobody else is laughing. They don't want to applaud when nobody else is applauding. They don't want to stand when nobody else is applauding. So if you separate the audience into these little pods, you guarantee that what they do is they stop behaving as an audience, because no one wants to be that one that's out of place. Whereas if they're unified, which Frank Lloyd Wright did, then they behave. And so I was playing a comic character in Beauty and the Beast, Lumiere, and I got the best laughs of the tour because everybody in the audience was getting the joke at the same time, and they were all unified. And so it was joyous.
Back to Whitman. Dr. George Ball, a professor of religion at Whitman College, I think married you.
He did.
What was he a mentor of sorts?
He was. He's one of my main mentors, and I still think about him when I'm unsure of what the best course of action is. Unbelievably wise man. He did teach religion. He was a theologian. But what he taught mainly was love. And he used to do just evening chats. He would go to a dorm or a public space, and the students would gather, usually 20 or 30 students, and he would teach on the subject of love, which was not a course that Whitman offered. So he would offer it of his own volition. And I remember when I was going to marry, I wanted to marry Paige. I thought I did, but I wasn't sure, because in my own life, I had no real role models of a marriage that was healthy and workable. And so, my first marriage I got into for all the wrong reasons. That the failure of that marriage was entirely my fault. My wife actually knew how to do it. Her name's Lisa Ivory, and she's a wonderful actress. She's still in Ashland. She actually knew how to be married. I didn't. But so I actually went. I drove all the way to Walla Walla to talk to Dr. Ball, and said, I want to be married, but I don't know if I'm picking the right person. I don't know if I found the one. How do you know if you found the one? And he said, first of all, you have to get rid of this myth of the one. He said, there is no such thing. He said, love is a verb, it's an action. So if you want to find the right person, the key to that search is to be the right person. So you be the right person, and then whoever you marry, you'll be okay. And I was like, okay, I want to marry her. So I did, and he married us. We flew him to Las Vegas, and I'm sure Dr. Ball had never been to Las Vegas before. He was quite astonished by Las Vegas.
Anyone's first Vegas trip, I believe, is astonishing.
Yeah, especially if you're essentially a monk like Dr. Ball was, although he was married.
Well, Mary Way has a question for you that ties into this. Do you remember a question from Mr. Ball's final exam from Dr. Ball? If you could live your life or go to sleep and dream your entire lifetime, with all the tastes and the sounds and the experiences of a real lifetime, which would you choose and why? Now,
What would I choose?
uh, if you could live your life or go to sleep in a dream or entire lifetime, and all the tastes and sounds were experiences were of a real time, which would you choose? Like a real life, or the experience to live your life, um, or experience it in a dream with all the sensations and experiences.
Well, I think life is a dream. And I mean that quite literally. I mean, we choose what we see because our brains are deleting machines. We have to delete most of what comes to us as input, or we couldn't exist. So right now, for example, I can make myself aware of my foot on the floor here, and I can become aware of it, and I can make that conscious. But until I said that, I wasn't conscious of my foot on the pavement. I can make myself conscious of the smell around me now, but until I do, I'm not conscious of it.
Right.
And so through consciousness, we're choosing our reality. And that is a dream state. So because reality itself is happening all around me, and I'm only experiencing a fraction of it. And that fraction is my reality. And therefore, the idea of a reality is, at least as far as human beings are able to experience, is a myth. And so I dream very, very vividly every night. And for example, this morning I had a dream and I was thinking about it. It's quite a wonderful dream because I felt lately separated from my mom because she's 94 years old. She lives in an elder care center in Oregon, and I had planned to visit her for Thanksgiving, and we had to call off those plans because of the virus. And I had this dream that we were standing at a large body of water, and the water had like a kind of a grass that was almost growing over the top of all of it. And there was a part of it, and I got into the water in this little boat. And once I got into the water, I realized that the current was way, way, way too strong for me. And it was pulling me away from her. And it was pulling me into this sort of riptide area, which would then pull me clear out to sea. And I got in that area, and then I realized there was a little bit of land there. And so I got on this little piece of land, but I felt I was far from her, and I was looking and I was thinking there's no way back. And then she showed me, she just walked over. There was a little sliver of land that I hadn't seen. And she just walked, and there was a way to just simply walk across that I hadn't noticed. And I thought I had to go back through the torrent and through the riptide, and I didn't. I could simply walk back. And I just thought that was a great dream because I thought, oh, how many little things I can do. I don't have to go through the riptide. I can call, I can text, I can, there are so many things I can do to keep connection. And I was feeling overwhelmed by the distance. And then just listening to the dream, I felt a bit better.
That is amazing. I know Mary wanted to say that she had thought about that same question for decades. Finally, in her late 40s, she felt sure she had figured out the right answer and happened to sit next to Dr. Ball at a dinner party and excitedly told him her answer, expecting a retroactive pat on the head. Dr. Ball said, "Oh, I never thought of that."
Yes, that's what he would say. What was wonderful about Dr. Ball was how he would, rather than trying to impose an idea on a student, he would draw ideas from the students. So my favorite class of his was a class called the Senior Colloquium, in which he would choose 4 or 5 books. Now, Whitman was what you did at Whitman, and I suppose this is the case at most liberal arts schools, but it was very much the case, at least for me, in studying the things I studied at Whitman. You studied something, and then you wrote a paper, and then you studied something else, and you wrote another paper, and then you studied something, and you wrote another paper. Everything was writing paper, was expressing yourself in the written word, and that was essentially every class. And so you really had to learn to reason. You really had to learn to make an argument. You really had to learn how to construct a sentence. And you really had to learn how to think, and then how to articulate those thoughts in a written form. So we were good at it by the time we got to be seniors. At least if you'd been a decent student at all, you became good at it. What Dr. Ball did is said, okay, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to read these books. But instead of writing about them, we're going to discuss them. And you just sit around a table and you would discuss them. So it was a dialectic. And you would pose your notions of the book against someone else's notions of the books, and then they have to defend yours, or perhaps have to reconsider yours and think, wow, that person's perspective is more accurate than mine. And I remember we studied Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, which I still give to my students today, which was a book about meaning, about finding meaning in life and the difference between meaning and happiness. We studied A Bend in the River. We studied, I don't remember, but it was a remarkable class, and I loved it. But I also noticed that some students you also did write a paper. You wrote a paper, but then you also had the discussions. And I noticed that there were students who could write very brilliantly, but couldn't speak, and students who could speak very brilliantly, but couldn't write. And I thought, oh my goodness, you need to be able to do both.
You gave a very brave interview in the New York Times several years back. I think it was a double-page spread on perhaps CNL. You talk about the balance of mental health, which was a great gift to those of us in the world who are mapping our own course. And it was another act of generosity that you shared those very personal details of your life. Now is the time that journey of discovery could probably be of great benefit to many of us. I know I'll go out there and say that I share some of the same things, and you've been a really a championing you've been a champion as far as that goes for me. I just want to toss out there personally. And I urge people to look up that article. Any further advice to those of us in that same boat?
Well, yeah, if you want to read the article, just Google Patrick Page depression and it'll come up. Well, that was an article that I had written after the death of Robin Williams. Before that, when they interviewed me for the New York Times, they were interviewing me when I was doing Cyrano de Bergerac on Broadway. And at the end of the interview, Patrick Healy, who was the interviewer, said, "Is there anything else I should know, or anything else you want to talk about?" And we'd been, interviewing for a couple hours. And we happened to be seated in the balcony of what at that time was called the Foxwoods Theater, where I had done Spider-Man Turn Off the Dark, and Spider-Man was still playing. Mm-hmm. And Patrick wanted to do it in that theater because, that was the big story, was Spider-Man, right? So, and I said, actually there is, which is that I have depression, and it's a pretty large part of my life, and so talking about me and what forms my work and my attitudes toward things without talking about that seems a little dishonest. And the reason that had come up is because shortly before that, there was someone who worked in the technical department. I don't want to use any names, because I've never talked to his family about it. But there was someone who worked on our show who I saw pretty much on a daily basis. Wasn't friends, was a coworker, but I knew well and admired the work he did. And I picked up the paper one day, and he had jumped off a bridge, committed suicide. And I had no idea that he suffered from depression. And I thought, maybe if he'd known that I had the same illness, he might have come and said, "Hey, you seem okay right now. What are you doing? Who's your doctor? Are you on a medication? If so, what medication are you on?" What had happened with me was I was playing Claudius in a production of Hamlet off Broadway, and I felt my depression coming on. I can feel it. I see it very, very clearly as a kind of a tidal wave. And I have this dream before I get it, which is if I were to look out from the balcony of this hotel now, I would see this wall of water coming and know that there's absolutely no way. It's so high, so large, so all encompassing. There's absolutely no way to avoid it. There's nothing you can do. There's nowhere you can hide. And that's how I feel as the depression approaches. And I felt this coming on, and I went to the director and said, "Listen, I think I'm almost sure this is going to happen. I've lived with it for my whole life, and I'm okay today, but I can tell you with almost certainty that I won't be okay 3 or 4 days from now." And he said, "Well, I need you to be okay because I can't recast this at this point, and we really need you in the show." So, okay, I'll do my best. And then I kept trying to go, and the symptoms kept coming, which for me, as they begin there, it starts with this kind of overwhelming feeling, the feeling of being overwhelmed by small tasks, complete lack of energy, complete lack of joy or happiness of any kind. And then crying jags begin, which really are more of a kind of a physical manifestation. They don't seem to be related to grief per se. They're a release of energy, but they come suddenly without warning in any public. It could happen right now if I were in that state. It would happen on the subway, and be quite embarrassing because they're really, loud, rocking sobs. And I could feel this coming on. And so I went in, I was having a bad day on the day of the first full run through for the technical crew. The artistic director and everybody was there. And I walked into this rehearsal room, and it's just like being behind a wall of glass. And I went to the woman playing Gertrude and said, "Listen, I'm not quite here today, but please know it's not about you. I'm not sure how much contact I'll have." And I did the first scene. And I could hear myself doing the scene, but I was actually kind of over here. And then, as I had done every day in rehearsal, I went and I laid down in a fetal position underneath the ballet bar. Now, what's funny about that is if you had that symptom in any other job, they'd say, "Patrick, go home." If you were working in an insurance company or you were a bank teller and you took your break and you went and laid in a fetal position under a table, they think, "Oh, there's something wrong." But as an actor, it's just all part of his process, So nobody said anything. And then I hear this wail coming, and then I realize it's me. And then I'm in these racking sobs, and I'm having this panic attack, heart beating, crying. And I have a very, very kind friend named Chris Jones who had done Beauty and the Beast with me for 6 months. He played Cogsworth, one of the funniest men on earth, one of the kindest. And he said, "I'll take him." And he took me into the other room. They called my doctor. They got me to the doctor. And I had, for many years, resisted the idea of taking any kind of medication. I believed that it would alter me in a way that would hamper my creativity and my emotional access. But my doctor at that point said, "This isn't really your choice anymore. You need to take these." And I still resisted, very much so. And I was not taking it, and Paige was trying to get me to take them, and the doctor was trying to get me to take them. I was still resisting. And I got an email. It was from an actor in the show. And he said in the email, he said, I have what you have. And he said, for years, I resisted medication. He didn't know I was resisting medication. He had no idea where I was at. So this is literally just sent, from the gods to me in that moment from this other actor. And I admired his work a lot. His work was very full emotionally, very complex. And he said, I take medication and it doesn't make me a zombie. It hasn't flattened me out. It just has made it so that I can think again, so that I can process things, so that I can experience happiness and joy, and so I can live in the world. And he said, I thought maybe you needed to hear this from another actor. And it was exactly what I needed to hear. I couldn't hear it from my wife. I couldn't hear it from my doctor. I had to hear it from another actor. And I did. And so I began taking medication, which for anyone who's considering beginning on a medication, first get a good diagnosis, get a really good doctor you trust, not a general practitioner, a psychiatrist, somebody who understands the mind.
Yes.
Someone who studied depression and anxiety. I also have an anxiety disorder. Someone who studies anxiety disorders, panic attacks.
Right there with you.
And then it's going to take a while because it's not an exact science. It's not like, you've got a wart and we know exactly where it is and we can take it off with dry ice or a scalpel or something. We're talking about the brain, the central nervous system. It's unbelievably complex. And so it's a little bit of a trial and error. So at first they gave me too much medicine. I became very lethargic. I lost all my energy. I lost my libido. I didn't lose my appetite. I gained 30 pounds. And then, they adjusted. Then we found out that my disorder had a lot of bipolar tendencies, so that I would go very, very manic and very high, and I would write a play in 2 days, and everything would seem possible. I'd go out and spend $10,000 without telling Paige, because when you're in the manic phase, you feel that nothing bad can happen to you. It's just the same. It's the reverse of the insane thing.
Yeah.
When you're in the depressive stage, you think nothing good can ever happen, and when you're in the manic phase, you think nothing bad can ever happen.
Yeah.
And so then they found, they balanced that out, and it took a while. It took over a year to make sure that things were. And then after that, then it's always a process, right? So I find like I'm doing really well, and I would like to have a little less medication. So then the doctor says, okay, let's reduce by 10 milligrams for a few months and see how that goes. So to just understand that it's a process, a lifelong process, not a bullet, not a magic bullet.
Exactly. Yeah. It's a never ending process that needs constant attention. Yeah.
Yeah. And of course I'm in therapy once a week.
Mm-hmm.
And I think my doctor's great, and we try to untangle things, and it's a process.
I completely understand that. Onto your, I'm still recovering from how inspirational that was. You've received a lot of awards. The Helen Hayes, for example, a Tony nomination. My guess is that you're not. That's not your motivating factor in life, but. It's come over as a result of your hard work and endeavors to be mastering your craft, and of course, that your voice is fantastic. God gave you a running start as a vehicle for all your skills. You were with us this summer doing Merchant of Venice with Urin Apple, and when you received a Grammy Award, can you tell us a little bit about that momentous occasion when you won the Grammy?
Well, it was. Speaking of the dream of life, there are things that you imagine and move toward. And there are things that happen that you never imagined. And certainly the Grammy is one of those. I had, as a young man and a boy, I had a huge phobia about singing. My voice is not, it's a very odd voice as a singing voice, quite unique. And people didn't really write for it, you know, so that if I would even sing a baritone role, I would be singing near the top of my range most of the time. So the fact that Anais Mitchell had written this role in Hadestown, which fit right in the middle of my voice, was just a gift, you know. And I try to tell my students, you know, the thing that makes you unique, that makes it so that you're not getting those parts because you're not this enough or not that enough, is eventually the thing that's your gold, you know. There was really no role for Peter Dinklage until there was the role for Peter Dinklage.
Right.
There was really no role for I'm sorry, I'm spacing her name now, the wonderful trans actress on Orange is the New Black. I'll remember in a moment. There was no role for her until there was the role for her. And then Laverne Cox, thank you, honey. And then a whole range of possibilities open. Now, Peter Dinklage had done a lot of work, and I think Laverne Cox had done it as well. But I'm talking about that moment where everything becomes possible and people see, oh, and then they begin making things for you.
Right, right.
So I've now had I have most wonderful moment in a workshop for a musical where the composer came to me and said, what's your lowest note? Because he wanted to write it into the show, you know. He didn't ask what's your highest note. That's what they usually ask, right? He said, what's your lowest note? And I had vocal coaches for years, voice teachers, who they would warm me up down to a certain point, and I had 2 octaves below it, and they wouldn't even touch it. They weren't even interested in that part of my voice. They would just keep trying to build the top of my voice, and I understand where they were coming from because they wanted me to be able to work, but it actually wasn't the right thing to do. So yeah, and I think for awards in general, look, I was just talking to Leia Salonga about this yesterday because she's a guest on my podcast, and she's won virtually every award there is in the book. Surprisingly,
lovely voice.
Grammy. She's been nominated for Grammys, but she's not won the Grammy yet, but she will. But she's won the Oscar, she's won the Tony, she's won Drama Desk, everything, right? Plus Presidential Medal of Freedom in the Philippines, and et cetera, et cetera. And I asked her about it. What I think about it is, in reality, we're aiming creatures. We can't do anything without having an aim. When I get up from this interview, in my mind, in a semi-conscious space, there's an image of what I'm going to do next. Mm-hmm. And I can't do it without that image being there. I can't go to the bathroom without first picturing my journey to the bathroom. It has to happen. And, you know, so we have our eyes set in the front of our head like this, which is, you know, and we're upright creatures, and they look forward in order for us to see what we want to move toward. And we do it in our imagination as well as in our waking dream. Incidentally, that's why you have whites to your eyes, so that I can see what you're aiming toward, because that little black pupil, where it moves, tells me what you're interested in and what you're moving toward. Not all creatures have that, of course, but it's because we're such aiming creatures, it's important for me to know where you're aiming. That's why you have whites in your eyes. But I believe an award is a target. An award is an aim. And that target or aim gives you something to move toward. Without that target or aim, you can be somewhat aimless, and you can you don't move in the direction of your destiny. So part of what moved me toward New York was that's where the Tonys are. Now, this is not something that most artists are willing to admit, or perhaps something that many artists don't feel. But I feel that awards are very useful as an aim, because the award, in the best of all possible worlds, doesn't come unless you're in some level of excellence. So you have to aim at that level of excellence. So, for example, in my category at the Tonys this year, they were all great. Everybody who was nominated is great. Every single person who was nominated was fantastic.
Mhm.
So you have to, in order, if you want that in your life, then you have to aim to that level of excellence. And that's going to guide your journey. Because let's face it, living in New York is hard and scary for a kid from Monmouth, Oregon. So in order to do that, I'm going to have some aim that makes me push through the difficulty and the fear. So an award can do that.
As we wrap up this interview here, I always ask this question of all my guests. Any questions that you'd like to ask me? Blame Mary Way for this one.
What is your what attracted you to Shakespeare? What was the experience that made you say, that moved you in that direction? Speaking of aims, that said, "Oh, I'm going that way."
It was very interesting. It was in high school. I really didn't give mind to Shakespeare at all, even though I was a performer from a very young age. I really hadn't given Shakespeare the time of day. I thought it was just, to something or other. And I am an artist as well. I draw and I paint and that kind of thing. And while I was already involved in the drama program at my high school, it was actually my art teacher, a lovely woman who has since passed on now, Barbara Barrett. And you may have actually known this person, strong ties with Utah Shakespeare. And she, in the middle of the art class, was introducing us to Shakespeare, had movie of Julius Caesar on. And I'm kind of going, why are you doing this? I'm here to draw. What has this got to do with art? And I laugh at that so hard these days because it was everything to do with art. And she knew that I was involved in drama and all of that, and she lit that flame. She got me very interested in all of that. And my high school and Barbara were very close with the Utah Shakespearean Festival at that point. We were borrowing costumes from them, and we were really launching our own Shakespeare festival at our high school. And once I spoke my first line of dialogue of Shakespeare's, that was it. There was no turning back. I thought,
what was your first line of dialogue? What was the character?
I believe the first thing I was cast in was actually a one act in the speech and debate tournaments. It was a one act, and it was of Taming of the Shrew. And I played Grumio to, Gremio, not Grumio. No. I get those characters mixed up.
Gremio's the old man, Grumio's the servant.
Yeah, Grumio's the servant. I played Grumio to Brian Vaughn as Petruchio. And
what a wonderful acting partner to have for your first.
What an incredible acting partner. He taught me so much. Seriously, he was my mentor through high school and all those days there. And I just have wonderful memories of all of that. And it was really due to those two people, really. And Utah Shakespeare, because I went up and did the acting classes in the summers and saw some of the most incredible theater and some of the most incredible actors. And really, there was no turning back after that.
Yeah. That's a great story. And of course, seeing those shows outdoors at
Oh,
the
yeah.
Adams Theater, there's something, really, one doesn't want to misuse the word magical, but truly magical about that experience in the Utah mountains as the sun goes down. And in that theater, talk about a unifying space. That's the most
Yes.
unifying space I've ever been in, and really taught me how to play. I was going to say Shakespeare, but everything. Because for me now, no matter what I'm playing, the audience is present, even if I can't see them, even if I'm in a terrible theater like the Masonic Temple in Detroit.
Mm-hmm.
I have that image of, because the audience was so present, and you would begin the play at 8 o'clock and it was still light. And I happened to play characters who spoke to the audience. So I played Brutus, who soliloquizes. I played Richard III. I played Macbeth. And you begin those speeches, and there they are, sitting there in full light in front of you in pastel shorts. And so to deny their presence would be the grossest kind of lie. And so you had to speak to them. And because you're speaking to them, it was a dialogue, not a monologue. In other words, how they behaved influenced how I spoke my next line, which of course is the essence of acting. The essence of acting is that you're not acting, you're reacting. But it's easy to forget when you're up on a stage and the audience is out there in the dark. And so the fact that there they were, and that you had to speak to them and you had to acknowledge their humanity, and you had to be there, really be there. Because if you were to put on a mask or a persona, a false mask or a false persona, because of course we're always putting on a mask or a persona, but if you were to put on something false, they would detect it immediately. So you had to have a truthful mask. I think changed. I mean, I think it's how I learned to be an actor, because I never did go to acting school. As I say, I never went to Juilliard. What I did instead was went to the Utah Shakespeare Festival.
Yeah. You can learn so much. I at least have found on my journey just by the actors around you, and it's amazing. It's the best education.
Yeah, that's how I learned when I was at PCPA. They had brilliant actors: Byron Jennings, Mark Harlick, Michael Winters, still actors I admire to this day, some of the best actors in the country. And
I know a lot of people who've come out of those doors at PCPA, and just some wonderful, incredibly talented people.
Yeah, I was 18 years old, and I would just go into the vomitorium where you could face and look at the stage, and I would just watch them. Mm-hmm. And I would just watch every night, and then watch how the performance changed. Watch the fact that it wasn't the same. Watch the fact that it was more truthful than the work I could do at that time. And I would say, how did they do that? How did they get there? Sometimes I would ask them a question or two, when I got my courage up.
As we close, so perhaps some observations you would like to make as a message to the world while people are still listening. What would you say?
Oh, wear a mask. I mean, that's really what I would say. Wear a mask and keep your distance. It's real. I've lost family members. I've lost friends. We don't know why it kills some people and doesn't kill others, but why do you want to roll that dice? Right. And certainly don't roll it around me. When I was walking through the Arizona airport the other day, I felt that there were a lot of people not taking it seriously. I didn't feel that so much at JFK, but when I got here, sadly, I did feel that there were people and that they weren't keeping their distance, and they were wearing their masks, below their nose, and in a lot of ways. I said, this is real. This is deadly. Yeah. This is airborne. And the good news is we know how to limit the spread. So let's do it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Patrick Page. It has been an honor beyond belief. This is one of the most incredible interviews I've ever conducted. We look so forward to your performances Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. For those of you who are watching, there are a few in-person tickets left, very carefully guarded for social distancing, just as we're talking about. You must write to S. Walston at swshakespeare.org. That is S. Walston at swshakespeare.org and showtix4u.com/events/SW Thank you very much. Thank
Can
you.
I say, Beau, just in terms of the show itself, if you're thinking about coming and you think, that sounds like a scary thing. I'm going to trust 85 minutes of my life to one actor, and he's going to do Shakespeare the whole time by himself. That sounds like my idea of the ninth level of Dante's Inferno. I just want people to know that I've done the show for audiences, and I know you will enjoy it. I know it will be entertaining, and I hope that if you've always been curious about why do people say Shakespeare is so great? Why do so many people say that this is the greatest man understood human beings and articulated the joys and sorrows of being human better than any other person has in any medium at any time? That's a pretty bold claim. I think this show might help you to understand why that is, or not understand, experience why that is. Because what I do in the show is I begin at the start of Shakespeare's career with his very first plays, when he was writing when he was 26 years old, and then travel chronologically through the canon so that we experience Shakespeare's growth as he experiences it. As he becomes more complex as a human being, the plays and the characters become more complex. And it's funny, and it's scary, and hopefully it's thrilling. But you will learn, but you won't know you're learning. The sugar pill will be the pill will be nicely coated in sugar, and you won't know you're getting any medicine.
As Mary Poppins is so fond of saying.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, Beau.
Thank you for taking
I'm actually on my way to get a COVID test right now to make sure I'm 100% COVID free for the audiences.
Well, yes, may the force be with you, and good luck to that and all of it. Thank you so much for taking your time and sharing these wonderful stories and your insight. You are an inspiration, not only to actors, but anyone struggling with any kind of anxiety or depression. Thank you from the bottom of my heart, and I think everybody that's watching.
Thank you, Beau. Thank you, Mary.
Patrick.
I'll see you soon.
Thank you. I will see you very soon. Thank you for tuning in today to a very special Storytime Classics Live with our interview with Patrick Page. Okay, that was very, very interesting. Please tune in tomorrow for more Storytime Classics. I believe we will have a guest reader tomorrow, as it is Thanksgiving. Actually, if I can recover from that interview there, we will probably be taking a dark day. I am so flustered beyond belief. I'm just not even going to hide it. So thank you so much for tuning in today. Please wear a mask and please stay safe out there.